Well, welcome everyone to our CovYouth 201 webinar on intergenerational ministry. I'm really glad to have my friend Steve Berger here, and we're going to be sharing about, I think, one of the most important parts of how we can really help our next generation in order to follow Jesus for life with a lifelong faith. So this is a CovYouth webinar. Last year we started developing these. We called them 101 webinars, as we developed what we call the essential basic skills to get off the ground as youth ministry leaders. And we created 11 of these. They're available now under the training tab on CovYouth.com. Recommend you check those out if you haven't already. So this year we moved on to what we're calling CovYouth 201, which is focusing on really what we would say are next level skills, the skills that once you get off the ground are really going to make your ministry thrive and pop. So today's an essential one, intergenerational ministry. And this could and maybe should be incorporated into your ministry from the very start. I've noticed that it's not usually on most leaders' radar. And so today we're going to dive into why that is, that is a crucial mistake, and why intergenerational ministry is so important. And we're going to give you some tips on how to get started in your context. So if you haven't met, my name is Eric Cave. I am the Director of Next Gen Ministries for the Pacific Northwest Conference. And I've also had the privilege over the last couple of years to serve as the point person for the interim youth ministry team, which has been a lot of fun. And I live in Portland, Oregon, where it's finally becoming spring over here. So I'm really excited to have a special guest with us today. Steve Berger is with us. And so Steve, why don't you take a moment to introduce yourself, tell us a bit about your role and who you are.
Yeah, thank you. As we were just talking about a moment ago, for a number of years, I, of course, was in the ECC offices. And then during the pandemic, I stepped down from that. But I've been working with the Central Conference with Danny, who is awesome, who loves youth ministry and children's ministry and wants the best for them. That we didn't have anything for 20 years in that conference. And so it's been a building season, but we have a lot of really great leaders that are helping us to get things going. And as far as intergenerational ministry, that has been a part of my heart for a lifetime. And so I'm very excited about today. And also just want you to know that if you have questions, there's a chat line there. So the things that we may not be covering, maybe I'm missing something. And if I do, please use that so that we don't miss something that you want to talk about. Or in many cases, you may have some things to share that are above and beyond the things that I've been doing over these past several years. So great to have you here with us.
Yeah, thank you, Steve. I'm really excited to have you here. You've been a mentor and an inspiration to me for many, many years. And I don't know what that says about our age, but I am just super thrilled to be able to do this with you today. So, and I just want to reiterate what Steve said. Please put questions in the chat. Also, we'd love for you to share your stories. We'd love to hear about your experience with intergenerational ministry as we go along. Okay, so I'm just going to give a quick primer before I turn it over to Steve, and just talk a little bit about what is intergenerational ministry. And so when we talk about intergenerational ministry, we are focusing on integration versus silos. If you've been around youth ministry for a while, you may have heard the term of ministry being siloed. And what that is referring to is when a church, sometimes they have developed like professional approaches towards like children's ministry, youth ministry, maybe even men's ministry, women's ministry and such. And it sometimes will even like give them their own spaces, sometimes their own, even own buildings. And what happens is those ministries then become more and more removed from the larger church. And so what will happen is they become siloed. So children's ministry or youth ministry will oftentimes take place completely separate from what's going on for adults or other generations in the church. And this is what we call silo ministry. And silo ministry has a lot of problems. Number one is obviously the isolation. You can see clearly in a silo that a ministry is isolated. The people that are part of that ministry, so in this case we're talking about students, become isolated from the larger church. And what research shows then is that that has direct correlation to students walking away from their faith after they graduate high school, because they leave their silo and suddenly they feel like they don't belong in the church. And also it contributes to disunity in the body and among families. So I've heard it said that the Sunday morning is the most segregated time for the church. And that's because a lot of times if we have siloed ministries, we all go and we go to different places, we do our own things, and then we hop in the car afterwards and go home. And so there's a severe lack of unity when we are siloed. And so we want to promote integration of all the generations as opposed to being siloed. And I just want to make a quick note, and that is to say, when I would talk about avoiding silos, for me personally, I'm not saying that we should never have age-appropriate specific ministry. I think that that's actually really important, but I also believe that like such as having youth group or Sunday school or confirmation, that can exist side by side with very intentional and fruitful intergenerational ministry. Intergenerational ministry, what is it? Fuller Youth Institute says it this way: a ministry with the primary goal to connect and unite every generation in shared relationships, worship, and service. And so in my mind, intergenerational ministry is really an expression of relational discipleship. And relational discipleship, if we really take it to its end, is going to focus on all of the students' relationships in their life. Of course, God and their youth ministry leader, but beyond that, also their relationships with their family, with their community, and especially the larger church. And so we want to be talking about integrating students into the larger church in order to encourage those relationships, which research shows is going to help them in order to be able to transition into a lifelong faith after high school. And so talking about some of the benefits, that's the first one: sticky faith. You may have heard of that before. It's a book written by Kara Powell a few years ago. If you haven't checked it out, I highly recommend it. But in their research of students that have transitioned their faith into adulthood, the number one thing that research showed is that those students had 5 significant relationships with adults in the church. And so that's why there's that 5-to-1 relation ratio. And that is accomplished through relational ministry. That's how we're going to be able to do this. And relational ministry is naturally goes hand in hand with intergenerational ministry. It also, intergenerational ministry help students with their primary questions. Probably heard a lot about this. There's 3 things that adolescents are developing in: identity, belonging, and purpose. And when we have them growing in those areas and figuring those things out among larger number of generations, then they'll have a more holistic understanding of that, but also for their faith. And then the other benefit is that it gives the church significant wins. We already talked about unity, but when a church embraces intergenerational ministry, unity is enhanced tremendously, but also vitality. And you can clearly kind of see that when an older person and a younger person are doing something together, they find life, and there's an energy in the church that is often produced with intergenerational ministry. When churches do like integrated services, or maybe have a youth Sunday where the worship lead band, where the students lead the worship, or maybe they speak, or they serve in different ways. The older people in the church often feel like, man, this is exciting, and it's energizing to them. But not only that, this is the crazy thing, is research shows that churches that engage in intergenerational actually increase in giving. And so there's an idea of like churches, when they approach ministry, maybe we need to cater everything towards the adults that are the ones that are the givers. But the reality is that when a church actually engages in intergenerational ministry, the giving will increase because of the increased passion for the ministry and the mission of the church. Okay, so I'm going to stop now. That's just my little primer. I wanted to kind of get us going. And I want to turn it over to Steve Berger. Now, Steve, as he mentioned before, his history and his most of the experience has been in children's ministry, but so much of what we talk about intergenerational ministry carries over directly with youth ministry. Youth ministry and children's ministry share so many principles on this. And because of Steve's experience in the larger church, he knows youth ministry really well. He's currently working with youth ministry leaders. And so I think what he has to say is going to be great for us, but you may need to contextualize a little bit. Every once in a while, Steve might mention children, or some of the slides might mention children. And that's okay, because it, I think, will directly correlate to what we talk about in youth ministry. So Steve, thanks again for being here. I'm going to turn over the bulk of our time to you to take it and run with it. Thank you so much for being here.
Great, thanks. We're going to take a look at this first slide. It comes from something that I developed a number of years ago called Legacy. We don't use that anymore in the Covenant Church, but I still think that these are helpful, especially as we, as a church. I think this is helpful both for youth ministry as well as across the board for the church. So here are some, I'm going to explain why I put these together. First of all is identify. And for me, some of the key questions for that is, who am I in Christ? Helping each person in youth ministry and or children's ministry to even be able to identify, who am I in Christ, and who do I want to become? And the church could be asking that same question. What do we want to become, and who are we in Christ together? What does that actually look like? And what are the ministries that we have that cross over that allow us to not only ask the questions, but to live into them? So this idea of identifying is really significant, because it's, what's my identity in the context of this church? What's the context of my identity with Christ? And how do those segue with each other? Because I would also say it makes a difference on the size of your church. If your church is smaller, the likelihood of interaction is much greater. Having served in larger churches as well as small churches around 1,000 or so, it was admittedly more challenging. So we had to find ways of integrating our children, our youth, in the context of a very large body. But I'm going to talk a little bit more about that later, but as we go through this, but this is just a jumping off point. Celebrate is another portion of our journey, our spiritual journey, in the context of the church. And that is, how well do we celebrate? How well do we celebrate with each other? This is acknowledging us, acknowledging every person within the context of the body, as well as how do we live into our faith together? So how do we live into our faith together? Acknowledging one another and celebrating together as a body. Some of our churches just automatically do that. They're smaller, they integrate more easily. And sometimes we will do celebrations of a particular group once in a while. But what's really great is when we can, we're going to talk about this later, is how we can integrate more significantly rather than just a piece here or a piece there. How do we celebrate also being part of one body together? Assess, where do we want to go next as a church? That's a really key question. I think that assessment is, how do things look for us as our church? Do we integrate one with another? And what does that actually look like? And does it have to do with ministries both inside and outside the church? What are the specifics for that? By the way, if you have some good ideas of things that you've done and you want to put those into the chat, that would be great too. So where do we want to go next as a church, and assessing who we are going to be as a body together? We'll talk in a few minutes about the specifics on what that could look like. Then the next thing is dream. What are the possibilities? What could our church look like? What does it look like now? And of course, none of us is a perfect church. But maybe there's some things that we can look into and say, oh, this is a dream that we have of how we might grow as a church. How do we reach out into our community? And how do we grow those within our community so that they are equipped to move out into their community? I think one of the things that in our churches we oftentimes do fail to do, although I think it's done best, quite frankly, among our youth ministry, is when they invite someone to participate. I would like to see us do it as well across the board, but you see it among children, you see it among youth. They connect with their friends and oftentimes invite them to be a part of the church. And I think that our youth and our children are among the best as far as bringing people into the context of church. And then, of course, being able to live that out as a church body. And then finally, plan. What is our church as a plan of putting our dreams into action? First of all, we have to decide what those dreams are and what those hopes are. And then after that, we can talk about, so how do we plan this out? What is this going to look like going into the future? Okay, let's take a look at the next slide. That's enough for that one right now. Why focusing on equipping parents? This is one of the things that are part of our time with youth as well as children's ministry. Parents have the greatest spiritual influence on our youth, either positively or negatively. And our responsibility is to equip and empower them to become effective spiritual mentors for their teens. But how do we go about doing that? Well, it's not an easy thing to do. And part of that is thinking about in the context of our church, how do we work hard at actually equipping our parents to be spiritual mentors and a spiritual influence on their kids? And what do we do with the youth that show up at our church, but whose families don't show up? Part of what we have done in the past, at least I've done in the past in the churches that we've served, is I reach out to them a couple of different ways. I try to talk to them by phone. I oftentimes would say, could we go out for coffee or something together? Just to try to build a relationship up with the parents of those whose kids are coming. Now, I'll have to say that it wasn't overly successful, but there was, in some cases, an opportunity for us to reach out to the parents who then became a part of our body. But largely, for those kids that came whose parents didn't, the parents were great to have them come to us, but it took a really long time for some of them to say, we want to be a part of this. And we'll take a look then next at this next slide that we have. Helping, first of all, these shared experiences, by the way, that we have as a family, shared experiences lead to a shared story and a lasting identity. And we're going to talk about what some of those things could look like in the context of our churches. But first of all, this is for both the church body and us as an individual family. So what are those shared experiences that we have? And what are those shared spiritual experiences that we have? And how do we have those shared experiences across the board with regards to our church? Do we integrate well with each other? Do we know each other? How do we engage in ministry together? And then when we begin to do that, that leads to what we call our shared story. And that's something that I think is really critical. Most of the time, we don't necessarily share our story regularly. And when I say that, I mean conversations across the generations, and especially in the context of worship. For some reason, over the years, we used to have what were called testimonies. And whether you call it that or something else, there's a shared story that we all could be sharing with our congregations regularly if we provided the space to do that. And I think that our youth have some profound stories of their own journey of faith. And it's really a shame oftentimes that the rest of the church is not aware of that. But once we have these shared experiences and once we share these stories across the generations within the context of our church, that moves into a lasting identity as disciples of Christ who make disciples. So that last part is our identity with each other and our identity with Christ. And I see that there's a from Maddie. My students seem to be all in, but I can never get parents to commit to things. Yes, I can relate to that. None of my students can drive yet, so it's crucial for them to be brought in. How do you navigate that? Well, the way that we try to navigate some of that is that we had parents of those that did really believe that it was really important to have their kids in ministry and have along with other youth as well as the church body. And consequently, what we would do is have some of them pick up other kids to bring them in. Now that's a big ask, but we did have some parents that were willing to do that. And so that was a help for us, just as a suggestion. Okay, let's take a look at that next slide. I'm seeing your face. There we go. Okay, helping families discover and live into their mission. Here's some things I do think that we can suggest to parents. Engage in spiritual practices together. And if you want information on that, please let me know and I can send you some suggestions on what that might look like. Engaging in spiritual practice together at church can extend into the home. I think that it's important to celebrate milestones. We don't do that as well as we used to in the past, especially as we take steps in our faith journey. And we want to be able to celebrate that both inside the church as well as in our homes. Serve and ministers as families both inside and outside the church. I would say that there's nothing more significant for our children and our youth to see their parents and to do something together collectively in serving and ministering as families in the church. Then provide balance and opportunities for what I call selflessness. In our culture, it's pretty selfish, but providing balance of selflessness means in the midst of all the craziness that obviously is going on in our own lives and the many different things that we could be engaged in, what are those elements in which we are selfless as far as reaching out and supporting others in their own faith journey? That's why we are really grateful, for example, for parents who have stepped up to be a part of our ministries in both youth ministry and children's ministry, and how we even bring them together at different times so that there's a sense of continuity between the two of them. And then finally, providing support groups for moms and dads and grandparents. And grandparents, that's another really significant role right now. We're discovering in churches that sometimes parents are not involved, but grandparents have had a deep and abiding faith, and they work at bringing their grandchildren present. Obviously, we continue to reach out to the moms and dads, but quite frankly, it's in many cases the grandparents that are bringing their kids. So that's something new for this season of life in the church. And the next slide. Most of you perhaps have heard of Bless, and if you haven't heard about Bless yet, I'm gonna tell you about it. This is something that we came out with a few years ago. I still think that it's really helpful to have. Bless it's an intentional evangelism initiative. We work at equipping children and families to bless others and share their faith stories. And what Bless is beginning with prayer, that we pray for our neighbors, listening with care. It's important that we listen to the stories of those around us that may not be persons of faith, or they may be persons of faith. The E is called eating together, but for kids, oftentimes I will put experience. It is great to eat together around the table, but sometimes that's not always possible. So helping our teens think about how do we share these experiences or invite someone else to be a part of the experiences of our church. Serving and love. And I know, by the way, many of you that are on now, and those will see this later, you're really awesome when it comes to helping our youth serve. That I would say that our youth are the most servant-hearted groups that we have in our church. And as the leaders of youth ministry, it's like kudos, because this is serving and love. That's what that S is for. And it speaks highly to what Jesus would want for us. So but getting the rest of the church on board can be a little more challenging. But serving in love, and that, by the way, can also include children. There's opportunity. They'd love to serve in many cases. They want to do the same things that they see the teens doing. And sometimes they can do that together, which is really awesome. And then finally, shared story. And those shared stories are something that we share not just with individuals, but we share those stories across our youth ministries and our children's ministries. And those are the stories that also need to be heard within the context of our local churches. And hopefully that could be done also in the context of worship. Doesn't have to stay there, but I do think that's one of the very special places for us to be sharing how God is at work in the lives of our youth. I'd like to see those stories across all the generations, but I think oftentimes it's the youth that can set the bar up for our churches. And then finally, intimacy with God through the Spirit. Even though this isn't part of Blessed per se, this intimacy with God through the Spirit is something that we want to help our church or our kids move into. And so let's take a look at the next slide. Jesus calls us to make youth a priority. This is children and youth as well. Children and youth are made in the image of God. We are spiritual beings, innately able to experience life with God. And some research that's been done over the last few years, one of the things, interestingly enough, that they've talked about is this, something that we haven't really talked about before. We know it in the church, but now it's moved out beyond that, and that is the sense of spirituality. And that even as at a very young age, we can sense the presence of God. And why not? God is the one that made us, and we are God's children. But we don't oftentimes, when we think about kids who are really young, that there is a spiritual component to their life. But there is, and that grows over time. And if we start when they're young, and by the time they reach high school age, junior high and high school age, they can have a really robust love for Christ and a sense of the presence of Christ's Spirit. Now, it can't always work that way because not every family functions that way, but it is one of the things that we're trying to help our families to see and do. You don't have to wait to a certain point for our children to know that there is a spiritual connection, a spiritual loving connection that we have with Christ, and that the Spirit is with us. And so when we say that children and youth are made in the image of God, it's because the Lord is right there with us, and the Lord is for us, and we are these spiritual beings, and we are able to experience life with God. Our kids are, and our youth are as well. But if oftentimes in youth ministry, because they haven't had that time beforehand, it can seem very foreign to them. And it may take some time for them to also, that's why we do some basic spiritual practices. And sometimes it's as simple as holding a rock and being quiet. And we'll talk about some of these other things a little bit later, but just being quiet and contemplating the possibility that the Lord is with them, the Lord loves them. And if there's one thing that we want to get across to every kid, is that they are loved by Christ, they are loved by God, and they want the best for God, and God is always with them. Next slide. Some spiritual practices, fostering attentiveness to the Spirit through prayer and worship and actions. And so one of the questions I oftentimes ask people is, why do you come to worship? And for a lot of us, when we come, I think it's to kind of be lifted up. And it is, let's make it clear, that it's for ourselves. But I also have learned over time that yes, I'm constantly receiving something from Christ in the context of worship. But when I come for worship, it also, I am reminded over the course of the week of how the Lord has been walking with me. And sometimes I've ignored the Lord, but the Lord has always been with me. And so I come to celebrate God. It's not so much of what I receive as much as what I can give. and give thanks to God. And I can't believe how many of our services now that there isn't any moments for prayer. Prayer of giving thanks to God for what's happened over the past week. And also prayer of being thankful not only for God now, but also to equip us to know how God might direct us into the future. And I do believe that our children and our youth are receptive to that. It's just that we've taken so much of that out of worship that we don't even have prayer. Someone may say a quick prayer, but there's no dynamic where we can be quiet before the Lord and listen to what the Lord may have to say to us and what we may have to say to God. So the spiritual practice is a fostering attentiveness to the Spirit through this prayer and through worship, as well as through our actions. So why do we come? What do we give to God? And what does God give to us? And we can never outgive God. God is always ready to give us his best and love us lavishly. And so helping to foster this attentiveness to the Spirit is giving them time for prayer and time for worship, not just what happens on Sunday morning, but our worship with our children and with our youth, and giving them time oftentimes, especially if it doesn't happen in the context, ironically, of worship, that it can happen in your ministry. So I'm really grateful for those of you that are doing that. Are you still there? Are you still there?
Yep, we're still here.
Okay, so for some reason I've disappeared. So I'll just keep on going, and hopefully I got the right slides here. So here's 7.
Okay.
Yeah, for some reason.
Next slide. Yeah.
Okay, worship is affirming the reality and the lordship of God, confessing our dependence upon God, and celebrating our life with God. And this can happen at any time and anywhere. And these are, once again, these are practices that we can do with kids, practices we can do with our youth, celebrating God, resting with God, which is surrendering. And by the way, the celebrating can also be part of all of these things that we do with our youth, all the fun stuff that they're having together. And I'm all for that. The one thing I would say I'm not for is competitive stuff. I don't think Jesus ever was, the disciples would get into a fight because of that. However, I think that the Lord would prefer us not to be so competitive, but to find things that we can do that are something that we do together that pulls us together. So that's part of that celebrating with God, resting with God, and that's giving some time out, that quiet time that we have. And during that time, I think it goes to the next one, sharing with God, which is communion, is sharing both the high points, the low points of our week. And what was that like? And then giving some time to listen to God, which is seeking, giving some time to listen. And then finally, the living into, which I think youth ministry does a really great job at, better than anybody else within the church, is living for God, which is engaging in ministry that's not just happening in the context of the church walls, but also outside of it. So I always say kudos to youth ministry with regards to that, because I don't think anybody functions more in the way of discipleship as it does in youth ministry. So I'm grateful for that. And then let's go to 8, which is God's word. And when we do go into God's word, one of the things that always worries me is that it can sometimes be seen as a textbook. But I like to see the Bible as a dwelling place with God rather than a textbook, that this is a place where we dwell with God and that God has something to say to us in that book. More than a textbook, we need to give space to ask for our youth and for our children both, to be able to ask questions and reflect and respond to those portions of scripture that they're looking at, because they're all over the map as far as where they're at spiritually. And especially for those that come in new for the first time, they have questions, and we have to make sure that we have space for them to do that and space for reflection. Then by doing those things, we give them opportunity to respond. I'm sure these are things that you probably are already doing in the context of your own ministries, but I think that this is important. And I would love to see the church in the context of worship also do these very things. Spaces to ask questions, reflect, and respond. But it's very much an important part of ministry within our youth ministry. And they have a lot of questions usually to ask. And those questions are the things that are happening both today, which are challenging, as well as their own spiritual journey. So there's a combination of what's actually happening in life and what's happening with regards to our own spiritual lives and how we connect those things together. And what would Jesus say, or what would Jesus do? And how does the Spirit help us to navigate through what can be a really challenging time in our culture right now? And we will go to the next slide. So and I'm sorry that I don't have the sidebar here in case somebody's asking me a question.
Oh, we're good. I'm watching, and I'll let you know if somebody does.
Okay, great. Key concerns for teens. Who am I? It sounds kind of funny, but they're trying to sort out who am I and who do I want to be. They begin to think abstractly. Not everything is concrete. Their bodies and their hormones are changing, and that keeps on going, by the way, long after even high school and into college. And we as a church must never stop affirming our teens for who they are and for who God has made them to be. At this age, they're trying to sort out what it means to be a man or a woman of God and how that differs from a worldly perspective. Because the world and what's going on in the context of the church are oftentimes not in sequence with one another, but we are part of the world. And we want to be, and that's where Jesus was. He was out in the world, because obviously this is his world. He owns it all. But he also calls us as disciples to be both not just inside, but also outside. And in the midst of all of that, they're trying to navigate all this stuff that's going on culturally around us. And then sometimes, at times, that butts up heads with the kinds of things that we are also trying to guide our youth into in the context of our churches. So I'm going to flip over to the next slide, which is 10. What do teens value? And I think that this is important, knowing this, and perhaps you probably all are aware of this, but the value for teens is important in the way that we then interact with them in the context of our ministry. So affirmation: teens are capable of self-direction and making independent decisions, while at the same time engaging in impulsive behavior. So we shouldn't be surprised just because of where they're at, quite frankly. Sometimes they are so astute and they're so amazing, and the things that they have to say, and when they get up front to talk about their spiritual journey, oh my goodness, it'd be better than the things that I could share or say. It's powerful. What they have to share is powerful, and they're excited about their journeys. They're articulate in what they want to say. And then all of a sudden, there's something, they engage in impulsive behavior that's like, what happened? What happened? And nothing happened. That's just a part of what it means to be a teen. And those things are going to be, that's just part of the reality, in addition to the fact that we all have a different approach to life, the way that we interact with one another. Some people are very social, some are not. So that impulsive behavior can sometimes be a result of our interactions with another person, but sometimes it has nothing to do with another person. It's just something that's within their own mind, of something that they want to engage in, or things that they've seen on television, or things that they've learned from somebody else outside the church. They still need to be loved. And I do think the church is one place that we can really love on kids. And especially, I can remember over the years, many kids who are hurting, whose parents we never saw, who were struggling in one way or another. And it was hard to, quite frankly, to lift them up, because life was tough and life was hard. When we had other kids that could come alongside them, leaders within our teen group, that was really helpful, not always easy. Sometimes they just weren't present, but we were trying really hard to walk alongside them and allow them space, sometimes to vent, and assuring them when things are not going well. And the venting thing can be challenging because you can usurp an entire evening together when someone begins to vent. And in those cases, sometimes we just had to uh, acknowledge what was going on, but then say we were moving on. But at the same time, uh, fortunately, we had a pretty good group of lay leaders also, including myself. So sometimes I could step out, or one of them might step out with that person, so that we were acknowledging that they were still struggling, but we couldn't usurp the entire time. So that's probably happened to you. But this is I think, a loving way of both caring for them and caring for the group when things are not going well. And then they're an equal and important part of the body. And we need to drive that home constantly for them, that they are loved by Christ, that we love them, that we want them to be a part of this. And sometimes we have a bad day, and that's okay. And even just acknowledging that that's part of the reality of our life together, but that they are an equal and important part of Christ's body. Those kids that really don't like themselves, that's a lot harder. And if you have people in the context of your church who are counselors, that not because they have to be there all the time, but because they could be an extra person for you, that would be great. In addition to that, the churches in which we served, we actually looked at different counseling services near where we were, talked with them ahead of time, so that we would have places where we could have our families and our teens go for help. Not every church can do that, but I do think that it can really be a helpful tool for those youth and for those families that are struggling, and to have something specific to assist them besides just those of us in the context of the church, because there's one thing that we can do, but there's things that can be done by professionals in ways that we can't. But we do want to do that in such a way because it's our loving way of assisting our youth. Then empowering our youth, I think, is really important. It's about demonstrating and handing the reins to someone else and providing ongoing encouragement. But that doesn't mean that we step away from them altogether. What we want to do is begin to empower them in the context of the church. They have their own thoughts and their own ideas, and we should be listening to what they have to say. And oftentimes, there's a list of things that I'll show you in a moment, of ways that they can participate in the church body. Now, the other thing that I would say too, unfortunately, is that it's oftentimes the youth that have to go to the older generation rather than the older generation coming to the youth. But it is something that's very powerful if you have youth that are capable of doing that. So part of it is that we are empowering them to also, believe it or not, assist some of our adults and some of our older adults and providing encouragement to them. At the same time, we have had a number of those adults, and some of them who are older have also walked alongside as mentors. And so that's been a really great way of building relationships across the body. It's harder to do it, obviously, in bigger churches, but I would say that it's been very powerful for those in the context of the churches that we've had, where they've had someone to walk alongside for a year. I don't know if you've seen this in your church, probably you have. It's something that's been around for a while. Empowering is not, but the next slide, empowering is not just telling, but being intentional in our efforts to invite youth and for youth to participate consistently in ministry, so that they know that they're part of the body. Giving youth opportunities to express their thoughts, their ideas, and share their stories. And that's really important, not only for those of you in leading youth ministry, but for the staff, your lead pastor and the staff also being aware of their thoughts, their ideas, and what their stories are. And you give them opportunity to share those stories in the context of worship. And then finally, acknowledging and living into the reality that participation is more important than perfection. So when we do invite children and or youth into the ministries of the church, it may not go 100% smoothly. However, I've always said participation, walking alongside each other, is way more important than this perfectionism that sometimes we have. And then let me also just say that I hope in the context of our churches that we have, and during my season of worship ministry, there used to be lots of different liturgy, and they stepped away from all of that, and basically it turned out to be 20 minutes of music and then maybe some information, and then the sermon, and then sometimes kids would be called to come back. I would like to see us more and more going into the future where we have worship that is for everybody, and that some of those liturgical elements are actually kid-friendly and youth-friendly. Moments of time for quiet prayer with each other rather than just a prayer from up front. Opportunities to share story. I don't know what's happened in our churches that we no longer share story, but the Lord is working in powerful ways every day and every moment of our lives. And yet we don't share those stories. They come out way better, by the way, for those of you in youth ministry. But the whole congregation needs to be aware of them. And then I would also say in the smaller churches, it's a little bit easier, but there is an integration among our youth and our kids. Oftentimes our youth just love on the little kids, and the little kids love on them. But also to have a church, because they see the youth engaged in the ministry of the church, they get to know their names. They get to know each other well. In large churches, this is more challenging. And so what we used to do in the larger churches that we were at is just say, look, this is a large church. You may have all been here 25 years, but you just don't know each other. And just taking time to be with each other, to acknowledge each other, to talk with each other, even in our larger churches. And in some cases, when I would encourage that, it wasn't always perfect. I heard a guy that came to me once and he said, well, I talked to one of the little kids that came up to me, and then one of his friends went by, and so our conversation was about 5 words long and he was gone. And so what I said to him was, thank you, first of all, for being willing to have that conversation. And secondly, remembering that Jesus was present, the Spirit was present in the midst of that, even that short conversation. And that child will also have an understanding that they belong to the church. Someone actually cared enough for them to even say those 5 words. Yes, he may not have necessarily received anything from that kid, but that child received something from him. So that's one of the things for our larger churches that, excuse me, that we want to continue to push, because sometimes we just have to admit this is a big church. So we have to say, let's take some time to get to know each other because we are part of the body together.
Steve, we have about 5 minutes left, just to let you know. Yeah.
Okay, I'm finishing up right now. So we're going to go to this last couple of, I think this is the last slide. Children can serve and lead by, and we've talked about most of this already today, which is reading scripture. I'm hoping that kids have been able to have opportunity to do that in your church. Leading prayer. I'd love to see children and youth leading the prayers in the context of worship. When we say leading in worship, they can also be in other elements within that shared faith story. I think that there's a slide that I can't see right now, but I mentioned several different things, and one of those was shadow puppets. Let me tell you why I put that in there. I put that in there because we have had, in the context of our ministries, kids with that are differently abled. kids that would never be up front. We would love to have them be up front and be able to share their testimonies and share their stories. But what we did was, for those that just simply couldn't do that, we discovered that if we put up a great big sheet and did shadow puppets, which was great for the kids, but also great for the congregation, there was no one with eyes on them, and they could participate in that way. Same thing with the way that we set up our sanctuaries. Are they all just pews? Are they chairs? Is there opportunity for couches? And why should I have couches? Why should we have tables? Those are all helpful things, believe it or not, for kids that just can't sit still for a long period of time, and they need that space. Or for some kids that are on the autism spectrum, the importance of needing to pace and eventually to snuggle up on some soft furniture, and in some cases even falling to sleep. And that to me was also, that's a God thing. So just being attentive to what the needs are. Obviously we have attentiveness that we have for our senior people within the church, but we have a lot of that within our youth and our children's ministries. And those are some things that we need to be attentive to. So anyhow, on the rest of these things, I know that many of you have already participated in mission trips. And what's awesome about that is you're able to come back and share with the rest of the congregation some of the powerful things that happened and the church was able to do for somebody else. Kids can reflect on scripture. They can help us set up, visit shut-ins, being prayer partners, serving in the community, utilizing their skills in the arts. And sometimes we don't do that well enough. They can be greeters, and they can be ushers, and they can share their faith stories. So I'm going to end at that. I think that since my time is up, and I'm really grateful for each of you and your ministries, and grateful for just the time that we can have, knowing that we will learn from each other, and the things that I talked about today could just be a jumping off point. And my hope is that as others, yourself and others read this, that perhaps we could learn more from you as well. And I would love to have you pass along some of the great things that you've learned also in your own ministries.
Thank you, Steve. You did a great job. Man, you are a fountain of wisdom, a wealth of knowledge here, and we appreciate you sharing so much. And I'll reiterate this in the end, but I'm sure you'd be open for people to reach out to you if they have further questions or would like to explore some of these ideas more. And we'll include in the description on this blog post contact information for you, if that sounds good. And we'll also have all these slides there. I just want to wrap up with a couple of things, and then just a reminder, if you have any questions or want to share your story in the chat, we'll do our best to get to those before we get to the end. But I just want to wrap up with a couple of tips. So one is getting started. So if you're a youth ministry leader and you loved what Steve was saying, and you might be asking, like, what do I do? How do I start? These are things you can do today or this week or maybe this month or this year to actually, from your position, help move the needle forward on intergenerational ministry in your church. So one of them is to initiate a mentoring program. Getting your students one-on-one with adults in your church will be a significant step towards them having these intergenerational relationships. And our friends at 10 by 10 just released a simple mentoring guide, and we'll put a link to that below so you can follow through that. As Steve mentioned, service projects are very easy. It's low-hanging fruit to be able to say, hey, we're going to do a mission trip, or we're going to make it intergenerational, or maybe we're going to go serve at a soup kitchen, or when a church is having the cleanup day, making that an intergenerational event. From your position, you can help lead those events and invite everybody. There's other events you can do besides service projects. When I was a youth pastor, we did a talent show, a church-wide talent show every year, and it was fantastic. Adults and students and kids all performed, and everybody loved it. Another one I would do is a Pound Your Parents Night, where I invite parents out and we have competitions with them and the students. Dinner clubs where you include students and families and you have dinner together is a great opportunity. And then, as Steve was mentioning, your worship services are places where you can have an influence to get involved. So You can have student-led services. A lot of churches do like a the fifth Sunday, they'll do a student and kids-led ministry, but get them involved with greeters, the music team, the tech team, and such. Those are some of the low-hanging fruit, as well as like kids ministry. I just really want to briefly touch on what is even like the next level, that if you really want to move in this direction, I would encourage you to consider, and that is this. The entire faith community and leadership in your church prioritizes the thriving of young people through its structure, culture, and decision making. I lifted this directly from that graphic that's there. That's the faith formation framework that 10 by 10 is put together. And as you can see, that's like the foundation for young people to be able to really grow and thrive in lifelong faith. And so I would kind of say it this way. The next level is really to help relational discipleship to be in the DNA of your church with senior leader buy-in. And that's a challenge. It's a really difficult place to get your church to the place where relational discipleship with students is everybody's priority. And so I want to share with you a couple of resources that might help you to get there. Number one is CovYouth.com. You're here now, but if you look out of the side tab, you'll see one for Relational Discipleship Kickstart. We offer both cohorts and coaching, but you can also just go through the Kickstart on your own. This is a very practical training opportunity that helps you examine every relationship your students have. And the final lesson is all about affecting change in your church around intergenerational ministry. Our partners at 10 by 10, I've mentioned them many times. They put together that faith formation strategy. If you go to 10by10.com, you can learn about faith formation strategy, and that's where you can find the Symbol Mentoring Guide. We'll put links to that below as well. And then one last thing, this book just came out. It's called Future Focused Church. I've got a copy right here. Somehow I ended up with 3 copies of this book, so if you want one, let me know. I'll send it to you. By Kara Powell, Jake Mulder, and Ray Chang. And it is really about helping to lead your church through change. And one of the things that they say is a key pillar that needs to be changed is intergenerational ministry. And then they take you step by step. Here are the challenges and the things that you need to focus on in order to actually affect change in your church. It's ideally something you would do with your senior leader, but you can read it first and get a sense for that. So, all right, that's the end of our presentation. If there are any more questions, put them in the chat really quickly. Thank you, Rachel, for your kind comment saying thank you to Steve there. And if we don't hear any more senior chats or questions come up in a quick moment, I just want to say again, thank you to Steve. Again, you've been like a hero to me and so many people, not just in children's ministry, but in next gen ministry and in ministry in general. You're an inspiration to all of us. And I just really want to thank you for everything you've done throughout the years, but especially today in sharing your heart for intergenerational ministry.
Thank you. Thanks for all of those that are participating today and for your ministries. Obviously, the fact that you're here says that you love on kids and you want the best for them. So I'm just grateful for each of you and grateful for your ministry. Thank you.
Thank you again, Steve. I see a question there for part 2. That's a really good idea. Actually, I was thinking there, like especially some of those like next steps, those could all be another webinar on their own. So we'll certainly consider that. Thank you, Maddie. I appreciate your suggestion. But don't hesitate to reach out to Steve or to me if you want to continue to have a conversation or get some coaching on any of these things. Okay. Thank you for everybody for joining us today. Thanks for watching this recording. If you're watching on CovYouth.com. I just want to encourage you again to check out all of our resources on CovYouth.com. We have webinars, we have training, and we have lots of resources there, an opportunity to connect with each other. All right, thanks, Steve. You get the last word. Want to say anything?
Yes. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you his peace, both now and forevermore. Grateful for each and every one of you. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good day, everybody.